Oi, fuck Roy Cohn.
Fuck Roy Cohn.
Fuck Roy Cohn.
Fuck Roy Cohn.
Fuck Roy Cohn. Oh yeah.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about Iran. Not really. We're talking about a political magic trick. A trick older than cable news. Older than social media and older than most of the people arguing about it. We're talking about the Roy Cohn playbook. Today's episode is called So, What's the Difference? Welcome back to I Hate Roy Cohn, and so should you. How Roy Cohn ruined the world. See, the thing is that he understood something important, and is you don't have to win the argument, you just have to survive the evidence. And only have to survive long enough to change the subject. Once the subject changes, most people stop asking for receipts. And that's the smoke screen, you see. Once you see it, you start seeing it every day. Remember we were told that Obama was effectively funding Iran because of roughly $1 billion in sanctions-related assets? Alright, okay. Well, let's look at the receipt. We have oil sanctions being waived. We have a Strait of Hormuz agreement. We have a framework involving $300 billion in reconstruction and development funds suddenly. Now we have, a deal that critics note does not directly resolve the ballistic missile issue even. And suddenly the people who spent a decade screaming about every dollar connected to Iran have discovered nuance. It's extremely interesting. It's almost like the way they discovered the nuance that the president doesn't control gas prices. Well, that is, unless they start a stupid war and get the Strait of Hormuz closed. Joe Biden never did that. So, my question is, what changed? It's not whether it's good or bad. My question's simpler. What changed? If $1 billion was an unforgivable catastrophe, then explain the math now. What changed? Present your evidence and show your work. Because the receipt is sitting right here on the table, gang. Let's take Operation Midnight Hammer. Because this is where the receipts really start getting strange. Now, 9 months ago, I was told that facilities were destroyed. Not damaged, not disrupted, not delayed, destroyed. Obliterated. That was the word that was used not only by Bone Spurs, but by Pete Hegseth himself. Obliterated. Mission accomplished. Cue the victory speech. Bring on the parades. Cue the headlines and cue the chest pounding. Fine. If that's true, then it's true. Now let's fast forward. Today I'm being told that the threat remains urgent, and the danger remains immediate. The situation still requires emergency attention. I just literally saw Chris Cuomo present this evidence to Bill O'Reilly, and Bill O'Reilly did everything that he could to jump through the hoops to say, well, none of this actually matters. Well, hold on. I've got a question. If the facilities were obliterated, why am I being sold the same urgency 9 months later? Maybe there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe, just maybe, intelligence changed. Maybe new information emerged. Maybe conditions evolved. Okay, fine. Present your evidence. Because those are two different stories, gang. Story 1, the threat was neutralized. Story 2, the threat remains severe. Both stories might be true under certain circumstances. But if you're going to move from one story to the other, you owe me the bridge between them. You owe me receipts. You owe me the evidence that explains what changed. And that's my question. So, what changed? Instead, I keep getting declarations. And that's where Roy Cohn enters the room. Because the Roy Cohn playbook isn't show your work. It's control the narrative, declare victory, move the conversation, punish the audit. And if somebody asks why the story changed, accuse them of helping the enemy. Question their motives, question their loyalty. Question everything except the claim itself. That's the trick. The contradiction doesn't weaken the narrative. The contradiction becomes part of the narrative. And suddenly we're no longer discussing whether the claim was accurate. We're now discussing whether you're allowed to ask at all. It's not accountability, it's a smokescreen. Now, second question. We've just covered this in prior podcasts. This is where the second question enters. The first question is, did we win? The second question is, according to what? What changed? What measurable result occurred? What evidence exists? What can be independently verified? Because reality doesn't care about press conferences. Reality doesn't care about slogans, and it certainly doesn't care about victory speeches. Reality gets a vote every time, gang. And it always demands receipts. And the blame game is where things get really interesting. Because before we've even resolved the Midnight Hammer contradiction, before we've explained why the story changed, before we've established what actually happened, we're already assigning credit and blame. Recently, Bone Spurs joked that if the Iran deal succeeds, he'll take the credit, and if it fails, he'll blame JD Vance. Maybe it was a joke, maybe it wasn't. Honestly, it doesn't matter. Because the structure's the story. Outcome unknown, credit assigned. Blame assigned, receipts pending. Think about that. We're already discussing who gets applause. We're already discussing who gets blamed. And we haven't even completed the audit. I mean, the evidence isn't even finished arriving, and the receipts aren't fully on the table. Yet, somehow, we're already deciding who the heroes and the villains are. That's not accountability, gang. That's narrative management. And what changed? Nothing. Nothing at all. The audit hasn't even happened yet. Now, here's the part that really, really makes me insane. I like to call it the principle test. Not because politicians change their minds. People should change their minds when facts change. The problem is when nobody explains what's changed. Now, for years, I heard that sending weapons overseas was reckless. I heard that foreign entanglements were draining America. Especially from people who tend to have sympathies towards Russia. Now, I heard that interventionism was a disease. America first, America first. You know, the isolationist motto that we've had since, the 1930s that Charles Lindbergh was part of was actually just a pro-Nazi party that was just using America first as a patriotic dog whistle. Hey, what's changed, right? So, I don't know. I heard that every dollar spent abroad was a dollar stolen from Americans, and that, sanctions relief was weakness. I mean, these are all things I heard over and over, pounded like a drum. I heard that economic concessions were surrender. Pallets of cash. Obama showed up with pallets of cash. Fine. Those are arguments. And arguments can be debated. Arguments can be supported. Arguments can be challenged. But they should at least remain recognizable. Because now I keep finding myself asking the same question. What changed? So, what's the difference? If sending weapons abroad was unacceptable then, what makes it acceptable now? If economic concessions to adversaries were unforgivable then, what makes them acceptable now? If interventionism was the problem then, what changed? When did interventionism all of a sudden, I don't know, become the solution? I mean, maybe there's good answers. Seriously, maybe there are. Okay, then present your evidence. Show your work. Walk me through it. Because if the only explanation is that our team is doing it now, then we're not talking about principles anymore, gang. We're talking about jerseys. And jerseys aren't evidence. Receipts are evidence. That's the principle test. Not whether you agree with me. Whether the standard survives the change in uniform. And Roy Cohn's real lesson is that people think that his lesson was lying. It wasn't. His real lesson was controlling the story before the evidence even arrived. You have to establish the heroes and establish the villains and establish the winners and losers. Then by the time the receipts finally show up, half the audience already knows what they're supposed to think. Evidence becomes secondary and team loyalty becomes primary. The question stops being what happened and becomes whose side are you on? And that's the trap, you see. That's the moment that the smoke screen appears and the conversation gets redirected. And as I've said before, smoke screens only work on people that don't carry gas masks. I'd like to think if you're listening to this podcast that you're starting to carry a gas mask now. Now notice what happens. The discussion shifts away from outcomes, away from evidence and away from measurable results and towards personalities. Ah, yes. Who gets credit and who gets blamed? Who's winning and who's losing? Who's embarrassed and who's triumphant? Everything. Except the thing we're supposed to be evaluating. The policy. The outcome. The receipts. Those three things right there, gang. The smokescreen isn't designed to convince you. The smokescreen is designed to distract you. TrustMeBro.gov, you know what I mean? Imagine the government launches a website tomorrow. TrustMeBro.gov has all, see here, no receipts, no reports, no documents, no audits, or no evidence. Just trust me, bro. Now, imagine asking for evidence. Now imagine asking for documentation and receipts, and you're being treated like you're the problem. That's the moment my alarm bells start ringing. You know what I mean? They're like, something's just not right here. Because evidence doesn't fear questions. Evidence welcomes questions. Only narratives fear questions. Only stories fear audits. Only smokescreens fear sunlight. And I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to show your work. You can listen to a filibuster from somebody for 10 minutes, full of diatribes and examples and charisma. Okay, completely understandable. Now show your work, present your evidence. It's really interesting because after you do that, you can almost guarantee that there's going to be a variation of these phrases, these little forward phrases. Like a variation of, well, it's obvious, or everybody knows that, or, I mean, come on, or you have to understand. The point is, that's not the issue. And gang, that's the tell, because none of those are evidence. Excellent. We've learned exactly nothing. Well, I've never heard of that, and yet it happened anyway. Now let's review, gang. Receipt check. Claim, promise, cost, outcome, receipt. That's the order. Let's say it again. Claim, promise, cost, outcome, receipt. Not claim, credit, blame, outcome. That's not how it works. That's how the forces that be wish it would work, but that's not how it works. And if we ever get around to it, the audit comes before the victory lap. The receipts come before the celebration, and the evidence comes before the blame assignment. I'm not interested in assigning credit, and I'm not interested in assigning accuracy. And if the story changes, tell me why. Show me what changed. Present your evidence. Show your work. Because feelings about elections are not evidence. Feelings about wars are not evidence. And feelings about politicians are not evidence either. Receipts are the only things that are evidence. I'm very happy for you. I'm very happy that you have feelings about this topic. I'm going to need to see some sources, though. You know, a while back I was on a debate show, and the host launched into this long metaphor about the border and burglars and shooting them, and it was a whole filibuster. Houses, property, and citizens' rights, the whole thing. It was elaborate and detailed, and it was clever, I'll give you that. But when he was finished, I asked one question. What are the first 5 words of the Fifth Amendment? Silence. Because suddenly the metaphor wasn't the issue anymore. The document was. The first 5 words are, no person shall be. Well, I guess technically those are 4 words. Not no citizen shall be, not no American citizen shall be, not no registered voter shall be. No person. Now, maybe there's still a debate to have. Maybe there are legal arguments, and maybe there are policy arguments. Fine, have them. But before we build castles out of metaphors, let's start with the document we're discussing. That's the second question. Not what story can we tell, but what does the receipt say? Because this happens constantly, gang. A claim is made and a narrative gets built, a metaphor appears, and everybody starts arguing about the metaphor. And suddenly nobody remembers to open the document. Nobody remembers to check the receipt. Nobody remembers to ask the simplest question in the room. What does the evidence actually say? And there's the Roy Cohn trap. The argument moves so far away from the source material that eventually the source material becomes optional. The narrative becomes the evidence. The slogan becomes the evidence. The team becomes the evidence. And that's exactly backward. The evidence comes first. Everything else comes second. So before somebody gives me another 10-minute explanation, before someone gives you another beautiful metaphor or decide they want to go ahead and spin their emotional appeal into it, and I'm going to ask the same question. What's the receipt say? Open the document. Read the words. Present your evidence. Because, whenever you ask certain questions, you start seeing the same reaction. Not every time, but often enough. You ask, so what's the difference? Or what changed? Or what does the receipt say? And suddenly the conversation changes. Not because the question is complicated, because the question is simple. And simple questions are dangerous. Complicated stories can hide inside of complicated answers. That's one of Bone Spur's tricks, is the ability to hide just a little bit of truth inside of his lie, especially when he's using projection. Now, simple questions force people to come back out into the daylight. And that's when I start hearing the same 4 words as always. Well, you have to understand, you have to remember, you have to realize, you have to look at, you have to consider. Okay. It's interesting. And I'm very happy for you. But notice what didn't happen? Evidence didn't appear. The receipt didn't appear. The explanation didn't appear. The conversation simply started moving again, away from the source, away from the document, and away from the audit, back into the fog. Now, maybe the evidence is coming. Maybe it is. Fine. Present it. Show me. Walk me through it. But before we start building another 10-story metaphor, Before we start constructing another grand narrative, let's pause. Let's do the thing nobody ever wants to do. Open the document. Read the words. Look at the receipt. Present your evidence. Because if a claim survives contact with evidence, great. We're at least on the same page. We learned something, which is fantastic, because if you don't learn something every day, what's the point of living? And if it doesn't, well, we learn something too. And that's the point. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to find out what's true. Reality gets a vote and the receipt gets a vote. And eventually the evidence gets the final word. The first question creates the headline. The second question creates accountability. Keep asking the second question, gang. And whenever somebody tries to move the conversation before the receipts arrive, stop them. Bring it back. Ask for the audit. Ask for the evidence. Ask for the receipts. And as always, present your evidence and fuck Roy Cohn.
Oi, fuck Roy Cohn.
Fuck Roy Cohn.
Fuck Roy Cohn.
Fuck Roy Cohn.
Fuck Roy Cohn. Oh yeah.